Okay, hello everyone. Let's carry on with the translations. I believe this one was translation number 25, and it is Cicero's and our old friend Atticus and his relationship with Mark Antony. You'll remember that it was Mark Antony who was, what was the phrase, thus their names are pricked. If you remember, it was Mark Antony who had prescribed Cicero after the Philippics speech, which we are going to be studying next term. Okay, look at this next translation, pause it, and then we'll go through it together. The first sentence. You'll notice that I'm actually breaking up this first sentence because it basically goes on for half of the whole translation. It's a very long sentence, and so I've tried to break it up into the relevant sort of clauses and sentences to allow it to make a little more sense. And you would have told by the last translation I'm pathetically excited by the new ability to underline and highlight things, and so I'll be doing a little bit of that today as well with this new one. First one then. Itaque ad adventum imperatorem de foro deceserat, timens proscriptionem latebatque apud publium volumnium, qui Paulo ante opem tulorat. Itaque. And so, ad adventum imperatorem, at the arrival of the triumvirs. You may remember that the triumvirs, this is the second triumvirate. The first triumvirate was Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. This is now Mark Antony, Octavian, this is before he was obviously Augustus, and Lepidus. So, at the arrival, ad adventum imperatorem, genitive plural, of the triumvirs, deceserat, he had left de foro, literally from the forum, but we would say from public life. He had departed from public life. Timens proscriptionem. The timens there, the ending of the ens, telling us that this is a present participle, so fearing prescription. Late batque imperfect, and he was lying hidden, he was hiding apud, at the house of Publius Volumnius. Qui, the relative pronoun here, to whom Paulo ante, a little while before, a little earlier, tulorat, there, tulorat, fero tuli latum. You should know your irregular verbs like fero, so to whom a little while before he had brought help. Again, there will be a significant portion of students taking the exams that will not recognize that verb tulorat. And that is a shame, and they should recognize it because it comes up enough. So, to whom he had brought wealth a little while before. I don't know whether it's better if he says to whom he had given money, but I'm not sure if that is actually sort of implied or whether it's just he had brought wealth in other ways. Tanta varietas is temporibus fuit fortunae ut modo, hi modo, illi in summo essent aut fastigio aut periculo. So this next bit. There was, fuit, there was tanta varietas, there was such variety, there was such changeability, is temporibus in those times. As soon as I see the word tanta, I am thinking to myself, is there a subjunctive? And sure enough, there is a subjunctive in essent. So, such was the changeability of those times. So, there was such changeability in those times. Ut, that. So, it's this result clause. The tanta followed by the ut and the subjunctive. There was such changeability in those times that modo hi modo, sometimes, modo here, that sometimes he, sometimes these men, and sometimes illi, and sometimes those men, were in summo fastigio, were in the utmost status. Now, I don't think that sounds very good. You can't be in status. So they had either the utmost status, or they were in the summo periculo, the summo governing the fastigio and I believe the periculo, or they were in the utmost danger. Notice the balance of the sentence there. Such was the changeability of those times that sometimes these men and sometimes those men were in the utmost danger or had the utmost status. The next bit. Habebatque secum, and, I'll read this bit out to you in Latin. Habebatque secum quintum gellium canum, aequalem similumque sui. Got this next bit. And he had with him Quintus Gellius Canus, his aequalem similumum, his very close friend. Do, if you have Quintum Gellium Canum, don't translate a name as Quintum Gellium Canum any more than we would say Brutus killed Caesarem or Caesarem. Make it the nominative, and he had with him Quintus Gellius Canus, his very close friend. Antonius autem et citanto odio ferebantur in Ciceronem, ut non solum sed etiam omnibus eos amicis esset inimicus, eosque velet proscribere multis hortantibus. Alright, this next sentence then. Antony, however, etsi. Now this etsi that we find here is actually going to govern the whole sentence. This is a long sentence again, so I've broken it down into what I believe to be the relevant parts. And the etsi is going to mean in here, even though, is going to really govern the whole sentence or a part that comes later on. Even though he ferebantur tanto. Again, look at that word tanto. As soon as I see this trigger word, I'm looking for subjunctives, and I'm looking for it to be a relative clause. So, even though he ferebantur, even though he was so implacably hostile, as it says at the bottom of the translation, even though literally he was brought in such hatred against Cicero, even though he was in such hatred against Cicero, even though he was so implacably hostile against Cicero, ut, and again I see the ut, and I think here is my result clause, that he esset, ut esset, that he was inimicus, that he was an enemy, non solum, not just to him, non solum sed etiam, not only but also, quite a common phrase in that he was an enemy not only to him, sed etiam, but also to omnibus eos amicis, but also to all of his friends. Eosque velet proscribere, and he was wanting proscribere. You'll notice there, I'm not going to do the whole thing again, but there should be a little R. I noticed that as I was reading through the last bit, but I'm not going to correct that. So, that he was wanting to proscribe them with multis hortantibus, with many men, hortantibus encouraging. As soon as I see that multis, it's not so much the multis ending actually as much as it's the hortantibus, I'm seeing there an ablative absolute, with many men encouraging. It's going to be an ablative form of the hortantibus of the present participle, hence an ablative absolute, which you can tell with the multis at the end of it as well. So, the important part, I think, of that really is the relative pronoun. He was in such hatred against Cicero, he carried such hatred against Cicero that that he esset was not only an enemy to him, but also to all of his friends. Okay, the next. Tamen Attici memor fuit offici, et cum requisiset ubi esset, sua manu scripsit sne timeret statimque ad se veneret. Alright, this next. However, fuit, he was memor, literally he was mindful, he remembered, he was mindful of the offici Attici, of the duty of Atticus. I didn't know if perhaps loyalty would be better here, friendship even. However, he was mindful. If you remember, Atticus was a man who really did try hard to be friends with everyone, even though he was very, very close with Cicero. He was always sort of reluctant to upset. He sort of withdrew from public life in general, trying not to get himself killed, and it worked well for him. However, tamen, he was mindful of the loyalty of Atticus, et cum requisiset ubi esset. And so it's et and I'm thinking, why is that in the dative? So I see the scripsit later on. It's the scripsit and he scripsit, wrote to him, cum, so he wrote to him, cum requisiset, cum plus the subjunctive, a temporal clause, when he had found out, and then I find a little word here, ubi, esset, where he was. Lots of different things to test you here. So, et scripsit, and he wrote to him, cum, temporal clause, cum requisiset, when he had found out where he was. Now, ubi, I see that word, it's a question word. He had found out where he was. Where was he? That's a direct question. When he had found out where he was, then that is going to be an indirect question. So we have a temporal clause and an indirect question together. He wrote to him sua manu, by his own hand, ne, in order that he not be afraid, ne timeret, negative purpose clause, I've translated that sentence. So, ne timeret, in order that he not be afraid, and he veneret ad se statim, and that he come to him immediately. Now, I suppose that this could be, alternatively, he wrote to him not to be afraid, almost as if it were an indirect command, but I've preferred it as a purpose clause here. But I could see, almost if you take on the sort of Americanized idea of writing as an order, I wrote to you to come here kind of thing. But here, I've done it just as a negative purpose clause. He wrote to him by his own hand not to be afraid, and literally in order, that he not be afraid and come to him immediately. Se et ilius causa canum de proscriptorum numero exemise, ac ne quod periculum incideret praesidium e misit. This next bit. That he, so this is actually now a scripsit, this is taking on that previous sentence, so it's an indirect statement. That he had say, so the fact that it's say means that it's referring to the subject of our indirect statement, of our accusative infinitive here, is the subject of the previous clause, i.e. it's going to be Mark Antony. That he had exemise, had taken eum, him, so the eum here is the Atticus, that he had taken him, and for the sake of that man and for his sake, canos, from the list of proscribed men. So the se and the exemise that we can see there are accusative infinitives. What we have here is an indirect statement, so that he had taken him from the list of proscribed men, from the number of proscribed men. Ac, and ne incideret, in order, ne plus the subjunctive here, negative purpose clause, and in order that he not fall into any danger, he misit, had sent, protection. He had sent protection to him. Sic Atticus, thus Atticus, in summo timore, in the utmost fear, fuit praesidio, was with protection, non solum, we've got that non solum sed etiam again, not only but also. Not only sibi for himself, sed etiam, but also a for him, quem, whom he habebat carissimum. The issimum there, superlative, but for whom, but for also he most dear. Sorry about that, I should have gone through this with this last bit. Sic Atticus, thus Atticus, in summo timore, in the utmost fear, was fuit, was with protection, non solum sibi, not only for himself, sed etiam, but also a for he, for him, quem habebat, whom he held most dear. I don't think there was massively difficult elements of this translation, but I think one of the most important lessons to be learnt from this is that when you're trying to figure out who's doing what to whom, especially if it is a relatively complex sentence and piece, make sure that you look at the beginning of the passage to get any help for the actual themes and the storyline, and also, if you've read your Imperium and if you know your Roman history, then it'll help you a little bit to know about the background apart from all of that. Alright, well,